Welcome to this chapter of general notes. Now we're going to look at some general notes about receiving yoga classes and teaching yoga classes. And some part of this chapter may seem a little bit obvious and maybe a little bit boring, but there's always some subtleties that we can look into and try and understand the meaning behind why we do a lot of things. So let's take a look. So in yoga, we breathe through our nose unless specifically told to do otherwise. For example, in Shitali or Shitkari pranayama. But generally, we always breathe through our nose, and that's for a few reasons. So first of all, our nose has these beautiful nose hairs that act as a filter so that dust particles get trapped and they don't go inside our nasal passage. So it actually protects us from getting sick a lot of the time. So our nose hairs are very important in the process of breathing. Also, when we breathe through our mouth, think of like a dog that's always panting, yeah? And think of a dog maybe when its mouth is closed and it's sleeping, and you can really see the expansion in the belly, yeah? The energy as well is so much more controlled and focused when it's through your nose, yeah? When you're breathing through your mouth, you're expelling a lot of air and a lot of energy, so it can actually be fatiguing and counterproductive to continuously breathe through your mouth. Think of, for example, when you scuba dive and you're breathing through a tube, yeah? That focus, it's almost like breathing through a channel, a specific way of breathing. So breathing through your nasal passage is going to help focus that energy and also oxygenate in a better and more complete way. Now, generally in an asana practice, we tend to inhale when we're making upward movements. And if you think about that, if we look at these sponges as if they were my lungs, we can imagine how that would work. So on an inhale, you expand your chest so that the lungs can open up and fill with air. On an exhale, the lungs contract so that they can expel the air. So maybe you can even picture that or feel that if you place your hands somewhere on your chest or on your rib cage and try and arch your back and open up your chest and try and exhale here. Now try and compress yourself, make yourself super small and try and inhale here. There's not that much space, right? Because the lungs don't have enough room to really open up and fill with oxygen. So it does make sense that when you're in an upward facing movement, your chest will open up and therefore you will be encouraging inhalation. However, there are some exceptions. So for example, when you are in an asana, such as Naukasana or boat pose, now you are going to make an upward movement to come into boat pose. Let me just imitate this for you. So when I come up, I could inhale. And when I go down, I could exhale. But really what's happening in Naukasana is this upward movement is actually forcing the lungs to compress a little bit. Yeah? So for example, the way I teach Naukasana is to reach up on an exhale. Let's see if there's a difference. Sometimes it's just a little bit easier. Now, there's no actual right or wrong way to do things. Remember, the yoga police don't exist. So if you want to guide the asana on an inhale or an exhale, the most important thing is that your students are safe. Your students' well-being is your priority. So really, just think logically about where the body is moving and how the lungs are expanding or perhaps contracting, right? So that should help you understand how the breathing is done. Now, although it seems obvious to inhale when you expand your chest and exhale when you go down, this isn't always easy for people to understand. Let's take, for example, Pilates. Now, Pilates was born from yoga. Joseph Pilates was a boxer, and he used to teach people by mixing ballet, boxing, and yoga. And in Pilates, for example, the exhale is always performed when the movement begins. It doesn't matter what type of movement. So chances are, if you have students that have more familiarity with Pilates rather than yoga, chances are they're going to be exhaling as soon as you instruct them to make any type of movement, whether that's upward or downward. Okay? So it's important that we understand the logic, more the anatomical logic of how the body is moving in order to really guide our students in a safe way. Now, counter poses are a super important part of an asana practice, especially when you're doing back bends and forward folds. I always like to use the cover of my Gayatri textbook as an example. If you do a backward bend and a forward fold, and a backward bend and a forward fold and a back bend, forward fold, back bend, constantly back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Take a look at my book. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but there's creases. I'm not saying that our backs are a piece of plastic. However, it can be super damaging to the spine when you're constantly going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. The safest thing for your students is to perform all of the back bends and then come into the counter pose instead of going back and forth and back and forth. So a perfect example of this could be the Sivananda series, because you have 3 back bends back to back. You have Bhujangasana, then you have Shalabhasana, and then you have Dhanurasana, bow pose. So between each of these poses, I wouldn't put a child's pose. I wouldn't put Balasana in there. I might, however, allow the students to just relax in Makrasana with their head on their hands and their big toes touching, relaxed in prone position. But because there's another back bend to do after that, I wouldn't bring them into the counter pose so that their back relaxes to then take them into an even deeper back bend. Okay, so for example, in the Sivananda series, the way that I guide it is you get all of those back bends done and finished with, and then you do the counter pose, which could be, for example, child's pose Balasana. A good example could be, let's say you want to guide a 3-hour back bend workshop in order to get into Natarjasana, Lord Shiva's pose, also known as dancer pose. Okay, so that's when your leg is behind you, you're holding onto your leg. And in the super advanced version, also in English known as needle scale, that's when you're holding your foot above your head. So these are some very challenging back bends. I wouldn't prepare my students for an hour and a half or 2 hours, constantly backward bending and forward folding. Otherwise, their back won't be prepared enough to come into that peak pose. What I would, however, do is constantly work on the shoulders and back opening, nice and chest opening and back bends. Maybe we do that for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And then I would work the last hour or the last half hour or however long that you have towards the end of your session to work on the forward fold. So using the counter poses, but not constantly right behind each peak pose. So just being really careful on how you place your counter poses to keep your students safe. Now, the time of practice isn't necessarily a very important thing. Generally, we tend to be more relaxed in the morning or in the evening. So some of you might prefer to start your day with a beautiful practice. Some of you might find it easier and more soothing to end your day with an asana practice or any type of practice, whether that's meditation or pranayama or a full, complete asana practice. It really is up to you. Mainly, we like to keep our asana practices farther away from our meals because especially if we're inverting or just even doing downward facing dog can be uncomfortable when you're on a full stomach. But just generally, any time that you have to make time for your practice is valuable time. Now, the place of practice can be important. And I don't mean whether you're practicing on a beach or on a mountain, but more the surroundings should be peaceful and pleasant. For example, if I were to tell you to take a beautiful Shavasana relaxation on a dirty floor that had maybe food crumbs and cockroaches or ants, I don't think you would be able to relax very much. So the whole sense of setting a space for your students and creating that space is so that they feel safe and comfortable in order to also relax not only in their minds, but in their bodies as well. Now, I don't know if you have any regular classes that you like to attend. Perhaps you like to go to the same class in the same shala every week. And I'm not sure if you have your own specific spot in the classroom, but I highly recommend that you try and practice aparigraha or non-attachment. And especially that you try and encourage your students to practice aparigraha. Now, what does that mean? That means if you have a student that constantly sits in the same spot all the time, chances are that if that spot isn't available to them, say they arrive late and someone else has sat in their spot, they're going to get really frustrated. They're going to feel like they can't meditate, the class isn't going to be any good, they can't perform, and it's all down to where they're sitting on the mat. That doesn't really matter because you control your mind does not control you. So if you're capable of meditating or doing your asana practice on the mat, on the right side of the room, you'll be able to perform it the exact same way on the left side of the room. The same way that if you practice on a mountaintop, you'll be able to practice in the middle of traffic. And that's not because you have extra stimulation. Of course, we want to try and avoid loud noise and harsh smells and wind and uncomfortable things. But really, you have power over the distractions in your mind. So if you are able to practice in a noisy place, you'll be able to practice in a quiet place. Same thing goes with the positions in the room. Remember non-attachment. The more that your student gets attached to a specific spot, the more frustrated they'll get when that spot isn't available to them. So just making sure that the ambiance and the environment where you're practicing and where your students are practicing is nice and comfortable and clean. And so try to encourage non-attachment with yourself and with your students. Again, we definitely want to try and favor an empty stomach when we are performing our asanas. Generally, pranayama as well can be very uncomfortable when your tummy is full because your diaphragm separates your intestines from your lungs. So if your belly is really full, your diaphragm is pushing up against your lungs and you cannot perform your pranayama comfortably, nor can you really perform any asanas in a comfortable way, especially if they're inversions, shoulder stands, headstands, but maybe even downward dog when your head is lower than your heart. So just trying to keep a light lunch, say if you're going to a midday practice, or if you're teaching a practice, then sending an email out to your students to remind them to not have a heavy lunch before they come to practice. Maybe if you're providing a yoga brunch or something on a weekend, just reminding your students to come on an empty stomach, do your practice before, and then you can eat afterwards. Having said that, I know that for myself, I often get low blood sugar levels. So I can feel really dizzy if I haven't eaten anything. So sometimes I make sure that I have half a banana before my practice, but I try and keep it light. Essentially, you're not going to sit down and have a 5-course meal before your asana practice. So here we come to a very important point, which is no straining. Never exert undue force while performing asanas. Now, what does that really mean, exert undue force? We could say don't overdo things, or if you need to take a break, you can take a break. But let's look at a very important sentence. Sthira Sukham Asanam. Now, sthira in Sanskrit means steady. Sukham is comfortable. And asanam or asana is posture. Now, what does steady yet comfortable posture actually mean? Because when we're performing asanas, we're not always very comfortable. And sometimes we're doing balancing poses or dynamic poses, so we're not always specifically steady. So what does steady, comfortable posture mean? Steady refers to the mind. Because the mind is like a monkey and it can jump from tree to tree, we try to steady our mind in an asana. Comfortable is comfortable in our body, but what does that mean? Let's do a little exercise. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to imagine you're in your very favorite place. This could be a place that exists. It could be a place that's imaginary, maybe an avatar world. It could be somewhere that you've already been to. Maybe it's a place where you feel comfortable and safe. Maybe it's the beach somewhere. I want you to imagine that you are in your very favorite place. I want you to smell the smells in your very favorite place. Are there any specific sounds? Look around you, look at the colors. And now imagine that right there in your very favorite place is a very comfortable bed, the most comfortable bed. Maybe it's a big marshmallow. Maybe it's a big mattress with cushions and pillows. And I want you to lie down on this comfortable mattress, comfortable bed. And now I want you to imagine that you're wearing your most comfortable pajamas. What makes you feel the comfiest? Maybe even imagine that somebody comes and brings you your very favorite snack. So in your favorite place, lying on the most comfortable bed, wearing your favorite pajamas, and your favorite snack is right there. Try and notice how your body feels. Maybe you take a bite or a sip of your favorite snack. Maybe you get all snuggly in your jammies. And take another look around. Take a nice deep breath. And then nice and slowly come back into the present moment. Gently blink your eyes open. Okay, so I'm about to set you some lifetime homework. And that lifetime homework is every single asana you perform, you need to find that same feeling of being in your favorite place, wearing your favorite pajamas, having your favorite snack. That's the feeling that you should feel in every single asana. Now, that's not always the easiest thing to find. We agree. However, we need to think about, for example, martial arts fighters, martial artists, maybe they're called. When they come into a competition or a battle, they never use 100% of their force, because then when it's time to take their opponent out, they're going to be too tired. So they always fight at about 70% of their energy, so that when it's time to take their opponent out, they have that extra 30% saved up. So similar to an asana program, if you use up all of your energy in Surya Namaskar and you perform Surya Namaskar super strong, up and down and right and left, you're going to be too exhausted to perform your asanas later on. Same thing with coming into an asana too hastily. If you come into, for example, Paschimottanasana, coming down, straight back, chances are you're going to tear your hamstrings, which wouldn't be healthy. That's when your ego is coming into practice. So the ego, again, that little voice that pushes you to do things probably for the wrong reasons, to show off. Who are you showing off to? Why are you in competition with yourself? So sthira sukham asanam, or a steady yet comfortable posture, refers to finding steadiness in the mind and comfort in the body so that you can maintain and spread your energy out in the healthiest way without getting not only injured in your body, but into that obsessive headspace. Remember, yoga isn't about the destination, it's about the journey. It's what you are feeling when you're coming in and out of every asana. It's the way that you're feeling through a progression, through your pranayama, through your meditation. It's not just about performing the headstand. I know the headstand looks really cool, but when you're forcing yourself, usually that's where injuries happen. It's when you'll start to feel less about yourself. I can't do it so good. That other person can do it so much better. There's no need to compare. So sthira sukhamasana, not only for you, because once a teacher, always a student. You're always a student of life. So I recommend definitely remember that favorite place, that favorite snack, that favorite pajama feeling in each asana. But that's what you need to remind your students. So you can definitely notice when your students are not connected to body and mind because of their breathing. And you can hear their breathing because normally they're breathing in ujjayi. So as soon as they disconnect from that ujjayi breath, or you start to feel or hear where they might be pushing, that's a disconnection. So the constant reminder to let go if they need to be kind to yourself. And that's something else, because I'm quite strong. I'm quite harsh on myself. And I don't often let myself let go. But if somebody gives me the permission, I tend to be kinder to myself. So that constant reminder of take a break if you need to. Careful, that doesn't mean never push yourself. It just means don't push yourself for the wrong reasons. Chances are if you don't push yourself a little bit, you won't improve or you won't get deeper into the stretch. But there's a big difference between forcing yourself into something that's painful and let's see if I can go a little bit more today. Let's see if I can go a little bit more today. So keeping in mind for yourself and for your students, no straining, don't overdo things. So you'll notice that throughout the course and for all of the asanas, we always provide you with the contraindications. Obviously, every asana has a lot of benefits for the body and for the mind, but there's also some contraindications that you need to be made aware of, and you need to make sure that you tell your students so that they can be as safe as possible. Now, generally, you'll have your students fill in a health form before they come to practice. This is so that you can be informed if they are pregnant, if they have high blood pressure, or anything that you can definitely help them with or avoid that you should be made aware of. But sometimes people aren't very aware of their own physical state. Sometimes they forget. Sometimes say they filled in the form, you've seen them in class a few times, but maybe something happened the night before. Maybe they bumped their elbow or they slept funny on their neck. And so you just need to make sure that they're aware of the contraindications in case an asana feels uncomfortable for them. Essentially, you need to make sure that your students are responsible for themselves. That means that you are there to check their alignment, you're there to assist them and to help them feel the pose in a deeper way, but you are not inside their body. So if they do have a medical condition, they need to have their doctor sign a form to tell them that you are allowed to teach them yoga and that they show that to you. Or if you're aware of any injuries that your students may have, while you're demoing the asana or while you're explaining it to them, give them the contraindication so that they can do the variation for themselves or the adaptation, or they can adjust the position for themselves. So for example, if I have a student that I know has a shoulder issue, I might guide an asana for everyone in the same way, but I might say, if you're having shoulder issues, please don't go too far, or please use this variation, or I will mention something that someone with a painful shoulder could use. So just making sure that you're aware of what contraindications could happen for each asana so that you can always provide the safest way and explanation for your students. Now, inverted asanas can often be a little scary. Inverted asanas don't always have to be headstands and upside down things. Sometimes they can be bringing your legs up against the wall. So I know, for example, for my golden yogis, for my 85-year-olds, they invert by placing a block underneath their sacrum and raising their legs up, because they're tilting their pelvis a little bit higher than it would be normally, and they're letting the blood flow from the feet back down into the heart. So inversions can be all types of variations of allowing the blood to flow in the opposite direction. However, you need to make sure that you're guiding your students in the safest way possible. So whether you're taking into consideration whether your students are menstruating, it's always good to announce that you will be providing an inversion, so that if your student wants to stop or avoid the asana or find an adjustment, that they have time to do so, whether that's for an injury or any type of discomfort. Ultimately, the most important thing with inversions is that you take care of people with serious conditions, for example, glaucoma or high blood pressure. Someone with high blood pressure never wants to position their head lower than their heart. Already they have a lot of pressure going through their arteries, and so they will feel flushed and exhausted with even the slightest movement. And if we add going upside down, where all the pressure is going to be in their head, someone with glaucoma, for example, where all of the pressure is going to be in the eyes, that can be very damaging. So always make sure that you are very understanding that inversions can be scary, but making sure that you're providing variations. Always make sure that your student is doing something. Your student should never be just sitting and watching everybody else perform an asana because maybe they can't do so. So for example, if everybody is doing a headstand, but one student doesn't want to, you can provide them with dolphin pose, Ardha Pincha Mayurasana. Or if everyone is doing the shoulder stand, Sarvangasana, and maybe one student doesn't want to or doesn't really feel like it, have them bring their legs up against the wall, or just raise their legs and bring a block underneath their sacrum. A student should always have a variation so that they feel that they can still do something. They should never be left alone to just hang out in child's pose. That's not a valid variation for something that might be a little bit more complicated. So just make sure that you have a wide range of options to offer your students, and so that they also feel safe in case they choose not to take the inversion.